Okay, I think we are gonna start slowly. Um, do let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me. As per usual, gonna make a quick check that the technology is running, that I'm not just waffling into the ether and it's not getting anywhere. Let me know if where are you watching this from? Where are you listening in? Just out of interest, what's up? How has been your week? Add any context whatsoever, because it's always good to know who's watching and from where. Because we're gonna get started in a sec. It's just that need to warm up a bit, allow people to join in. Okay, one is from UK, Cosmos Beta. Hey, Ignat from Tokyo. Welcome. Awesome stuff. So I guess we're gonna have a global crowd as per usual, which is always interesting, especially for topics like portfolios. Portfolios are also quite regional, so you need to take with a grain of salt. At least Ignat, if you're in Japanese market or not working like globally remotely, you're probably gonna need to sift through the advice and see exactly what makes sense given different cultures, different design maturities, things of that nature, because certain companies are going to value like, UX as UX, others visual design and so forth. And obviously we're going to touch base on that too. But yeah, let's get started. It's going to be very quick and well, not quick, but it's going to be, I guess, pointed. I haven't had any chance to look into these portfolios deeply, but a couple of community members, DP, Bez, and Son. I don't want to, like Daniel basically added a note, and also we have Echoes, which is Christopher. So two people, ultimately two brave community members from Design Squad just submitted their portfolios with some context, and that's what we're gonna do in this session. Before we jump into that, if you haven't, if you're not aware ultimately of a Design Squad community, the UX community, do join. What you need to do is really follow one of the links in the bio or just Google, if you go Design Squad Discord, all the top options gonna give you a link and an invite. It's open to absolutely everyone. You can join, you can connect with, I think, roughly 16,000 people in UX. Some developers, some UX researchers, some visual designers. It doesn't really matter. Like, it's a variety of people, and it's an awesome place, especially if you want to get your portfolio reviewed, but also submit some stuff for feedback, like designs, or help out other people. But yeah, just that I got that plug out of the way. Let's jump immediately into the case studies. So the first case study, and hi, by the way, I'm seeing you're popping in from Phoenix, Milano, Scotland. Hey, everyone who's joining in. Do leave a comment as well as I go through this, by the way. Interrupt me, challenge me, because I'm going to run through my thought train, train of thought. But if you have some add-ons or if you have questions specifically or something which kind of like, oh, maybe it's this, shoot from the hip. You don't have to be entirely right. It's all about learning together and as a community kind of reviewing someone else's work and learning from it. So the first case study is from Daniel, or the first portfolio, sorry. Like, we're going to need to be picky of what we actually discuss here, but I'm going to run through as much as I can. So it's from Daniel, and Daniel is saying, I'd love to have my portfolio get some feedback. I recently transitioned my portfolio to Adobe Portfolio, I guess a platform for portfolios, and I'm trying a new style. I am product designer slash UX designer with 6 years of experience, meaning senior. I have been a generalist for the first part of my career, but I am trying to find my niche. Interesting. I worked in e-commerce and finance mostly. I'd like to get back to more tech roles rather than finance, and eventually want to get a job where I can grow into staff principal level and develop my leadership skills. My first 6 years in UX was during the COVID bubble, so although I worked, I did not get a lot of mentorship or guidance. I tended to work with non-technical people at banks. Although I'm self-starter and self-learner, I'd really like to work at a place that will push me and guide me to the next level. It's hard to find a place where I can grow and develop in what feels like senior-only market, which is fair. I am hoping to create portfolios that shows I can do the work, but I also have potential and I'm worth investing in. Cool. So I'm going to address a few points here before we jump into actual samples, because I think it's key, especially if you kind of, like some of the things here could be addressed with a portfolio upgrade, but some of them kind of are pointed to just general career development. For example, things like staff and principal level, if something that's what Daniel wants to target, it's very easy to identify exactly what the portfolio needs to look like for staff or principal. It has to do a lot of those leadership skills, as Daniel puts. But the point is, if you want to get a job at the next level, if you're a senior and you want to get staff position, you need to demonstrate those skills in your resume. That's number one, because that's kind of like before recruiters even go to your portfolio, your resume has to show that you're able to do that staff designer job. So every other point within your kind of like, let's say if you worked at Acme Corp, and you say, I did this and this and that, all those things should state basically that you did or acted. You could even say, I acted as a staff or principal designer for the team and acted as a leader, a bold leader, a brave, someone who basically speaks out about the standards or set up some other bits ultimately. There's a lot more we could go into it. If you want to, again, a video on that, I'm happy to run maybe a separate live stream or separate video on that. But ultimately, your resume should basically, for someone who takes a look at it, should be like, yeah, this is a staff designer. Even if the role was senior, they acted, along those lines of being like a proper staff who's confident to do that. So that's one. Other bits which I think are interesting here is that he has been acted as a generalist for first part of a career, and those first 6 years in UX was obviously remote. No, I guess, help or I guess direct mentorship from someone more senior, which is also, I guess, it's a good challenge. I think most of the people coming into UX now are going to have to do this, to be blunt and just frank. Ultimately, like the mentorship or apprenticeship model is no longer existing because most of the companies are remote or hybrid. So you're never brushing shoulders with more senior people or as direct or, exchanging anecdotes or having that kind of feedback. It's all remote. So everyone is kind of going to need to get used to this, where your mentorship is what you do about it. Like, how do you consume the knowledge? How do you experiment? So to me, it's a good challenge because immediately it positions you as a leader, because from get-go, you're going to need to be brave enough to apply and make mistakes and learn from it, given the risk and all the other factors combined, which you need to consider in the role. So this is more of a general career advice thing, but it's something you kind of need to just reflect and say, hey, maybe I'm not going to have that mentorship until I do. What can I do with what I have right now so I can still develop my skills? And as such, you're just going to need to double down and do some work, basically. Learn new things, apply them, and see what works, what doesn't in a safe enough environments, and then develop your skills. And eventually, once you meet someone who's a heavyweight UXer, they can basically give you guidance. But yeah. Or maybe you're going to nail that and going to get a job where you have a good manager who's going to work with you as a player coach. And immediately they can fix or guide you or say, hey, this is what you've been doing for the last 6 years is not that great. Hey, everyone, by the way, I see trickling and more people on the stream. But I don't think anything else here I should be able to call out. I think it's fair. The only thing which is missing is really, where is Daniel based? Oh, I see. Based in San Francisco, CA. Okay, that answered immediately, because I think that's also interesting theme. If they would be based in somewhere EU, the advice would probably be a bit different, because again, it has to be pointed. But I would expect Daniel to also take everything with a pinch of salt and reflect what the market actually needs. But yeah, let's dive into Daniel's case study immediately about waffling. So simple portfolio, clean, right? Like, we have projects, which is where you land. You have the about page. And again, I haven't looked into this much, by the way. You have contact, getting in touch, and you have a resume, which I'm not going to go into it because it's, it's different kind of video. And that's about it. Some social links, pretty pointed. Now, just to give a few pointers on the actual portfolio. because Daniel has 6 years of experience. And obviously they're being, I guess, they're presenting the things in a clean enough light. So you have a lot of white space, you have just content. And I think the presumption is that the content is going to do the talking and is going to convince someone. Immediately, what we're doing right, I think, is defining what we are passionate about from UX perspective, which is that UX design, interaction design, UX strategy. You could skin it like that, and then call to action element, really important. So that's a good thing. It's good to kind of just snip it in a button and say, hey, you can just contact me. One thing which kind of stood out, I guess, is just consistency of a type. And this is very small thing which you probably don't hear much from me. But the consistency in type and headlines and things of that nature, just that form looks a bit off. Again, very small cosmetic nitpicky thing, which probably nobody would actually, trial Daniel or kind of put them on the trial or try to question their design expertise or UX expertise. But the about page itself, I would want Daniel to maybe add a photo or something like that. It's very wordy, highlight, maybe bold some things, especially when it comes to text heavy content. I'm not even talking about case studies just yet, but even then, it's kind of like just give me something at a glance I can consume quickly, and it's very heavy in text. Just visualize it. I think that would be fair too. You don't have to go overboard, considering privacy and things of that nature, but you could illustrate it a bit more because right now it's a bit too clean or too text heavy. So let me consume it easier. And then the project space or the main one, I think Daniel here is leading with logos, not photos, but the logos themselves. And I think, some of them are big names. They say eBay. It's immediately something which adds a lot of gravitas to a case study because it's a globally known, basically, company, right? So you immediately would resonate. And for me as a hiring manager, that would be my thinking. It's like, okay, eBay, okay, LPL Financial is not something I'm aware. Applied Materials I've heard of. First Republic Bank too. But I would then, as a hiring manager, go through it and kind of scan quickly of what the actual thing is. I would try to assess exactly what the outcome was or what the output quality was. So it's almost like this is where the visual based value prop would come in, where you have to kind of convince the actual reviewer that, okay, this is what the actual results are of the case study. So you kind of want it to be glossy enough, but I respect also Daniel's choice to keep it clean and kind of then lead with the rest of the case study. Let me see if I should maybe pick a different one. Maybe I'm going to go with eBay, actually. I don't know if Daniel would prefer me to go with LPL. If Daniel is on a stream, do shout out, because I'm probably going to just go through one case study just to keep it pointed. Generally, so far, I think the case, the portfolio is super clean, almost like too clean. You could jazz it up and add a bit of a spice, and this is going to be a general theme, I guess, throughout the next batch of portfolios I ought to review or I'm going to get. It's just because the hiring market shifted a bit, and a lot of the hiring managers or a lot of those following openings you see in the market require you to be like basically a jack of all trades, and one of the biggest skills in demand is to be, I guess, capable to work with design systems and make things visually appealing, which is, a sad case just for UX design. However, until we get to the point where we can specialize in UX strategy, let's say, or research, or something in between, like information architecture, just pure UX skills, you kind of have to present your work in as glossy way as possible. And I have some thoughts I can share later on of how to do so. But I think a call to action for everyone is like thinking like, how can I present my case studies, which are already solid, in a better light, so that someone who's, let's say, reviewing it would, like one of the pointers, which could be a minor one in a job spec, could be like, oh, they need to be able to do some visual work or, craft UIs or prototype UIs at a high enough fidelity or things of that nature. And then it just could fall through because you don't have that skill set. to do polished work. Again, maybe it's not a position you're seeking, which is fair enough, but because Daniel said product design slash UX design, which product design leans more towards visual means or visual UI means, that's where I would be questioning that. Daniel, maybe consider creating a shadow portfolio which you can A/B test and make it more UI biased. But don't bias your work specifically, like the eBay case study, which again, I could challenge it, but just bias your whole portfolio that you can do some of that UI work as required, even if your most skill set is in UX, if that makes sense. Just a quick check. Hey people, UX UI designer here. I have around 3 years of experience in a large, well-known company in my country. Current aspirations are to progress to a senior design role by taking on more. More of what? More of projects, I hope, because that's how you can develop your skills. Just like I was suggesting for Daniel to also, like, you know, to go forward, or everyone really. Anyhow, let's unpack this case study, the eBay one. So, first and foremost, this I think eBay alone is gonna have a lot of those brownie points for a lot of the different companies, and just because it's known. So if you're lucky to work on one of these companies, which everybody knows, you kind of immediately are upped, you know, could be fairly, could be unfairly, but kudos to Daniel because they have this in their portfolio. So their role, UX designer, the teammates, listing the names as well, if appropriate, that's fine. So there was senior designer, was design lead, product manager, product owner, and then that's roughly half a year, I guess, maybe a bit more than half a year. Well, actually more. So that's quite lengthy project. An overview, again, a lot of wording. As a hiring manager, I probably would just go almost like bullet pointed and try to extract and might miss something. So Daniel, if you keep this stuff in a lot of wording, make sure to bold it or something along those lines. Just give me like a digest, because no hiring manager is going to spend more than a few minutes on a case study. That's just a harsh truth. But even me now going and breaking down step by step, it's not going to happen in real life. They're just going to look, oh, eBay, they did some work on some sort of enterprise tool, customer experience obviously, but still enterprise tool to edit volume pricing, add some promotions and things of that nature. Fair enough, I might talk to him, maybe there's a fit, and then do the rest basically. But if you expect me to read through it, make it easier for me to do so. And I would be looking immediately what the problem is. So Promotions Manager is a powerful tool that eBay sellers can use to create and manage special offers for their buyers, such as discounts, free shipping, and other incentives. And to make Promotions Manager more accessible to all sellers, my team worked to make some of the key features available to both store. Okay, so this is where I would be like immediately, maybe it's worth rewarding this to clearly state what the problems are. So it could be that accessibility is hidden, or like the features are hidden, and that's what you mean by accessible to all sellers. Or it could be that it's just available to some personas but not others, or some customers but not others, or it's maybe otherwise hidden. So that's something you could clarify. Let's say, like if I would state that this is what I'm doing, I want to make it accessible, I would maybe put in the brackets and say, maybe it's actual UI accessibility issues, or it doesn't pass the WCAG standard. That could be one of the problems you could just preface. Or it could be that the features are just too hidden and every other user test of the feature just fails it. There is not enough conversions or adoptions of a feature. Bam, you have a solid problem. Now you can kind of expand of what the project is about, if that makes sense. Okay, this has two benefits. That's fair. You lead already with, I guess, hypothesis here, but I would frame the problem a bit better. So it's a bit more pointed. Again, like what's the actual business problem? What's exactly the customer or user problem? And then lead with that. Like then I would want to know what you hypothesize to solve it with, and then see what the actual solution is like. And again, I might be skipping some essentials here, but the hiring manager who's going to review it, we're not going to have time to do any more justice in that. We're just going to skim through it. How can we increase the promotions amongst eBay sellers? So there is a hub, I guess, or existing place where that thing is. You explore more, increase their order values, become repeat customers. Again, a lot of words, a lot of words. And here, I guess you go into the actual problem where, however, two primary challenges exist. Non-store subscribers lack access. Okay, so that's something which is, I think you could hint in the beginning too, just maybe separate the two sections clear. And then many store subscribers remain unaware of promotions managers' potential in driving increased sales. Now, if you would have some data to support these statements, that would be even more, or you could even say, what is this based on? So I've seen a lot of senior portfolios where people would state something like that, where they say, let's say, I don't know, conversions are not improving, or there's some sort of other problems. They could literally bracket and say, this is analytics data, or this is behavioral data, or this is coming from somewhere. You could kind of specify it. I know it could be under NDA, it could be the project IP you cannot infringe, but then you could literally state that you can only show some information which is available publicly, or publicly enough, basically, which is not infringing under NDAs. You've probably seen my portfolio reviews from before, where some portfolios would literally preface before the case study starts, like a block saying, hey, a lot of the information is abstracted because of the NDAs. And everybody's going to be fine with that, basically. But so far, it's a lot of wording, and a lot of the wording which you kind of wordsmith a bit, or make it a bit more pointed or specific. And then building upon eBay's successive integration promotion listings into a new listing tool, my team embarked on the task of migrating other promotions to active listing. So this statement itself, and I'm being nitpicky here, but you could have added it here, basically. In your overview, you could state that what the problem, like basically what the promotion manager is, which is great. Then you could state what the actual problems are very specifically, and then you could say what you actually did as a team, and only then dig deeper if the people want to see it. But yeah, just a clear breakdown would be really useful. And then active listing is a tool managing listing, including prices. You can also yada yada. So I imagine this is a before, right? And if so, you should clearly state that this is the before. And then promotion manager is a tool for creating and managing special offers such as discounts, free shipping, and other incentives. Create a variety of different types of promotions, including order discounts, coupons, shipping discounts, sale events, and volume pricing. So I guess that's where the promotion manager would come in, right? And that's a flow you designed. And again, I'm thinking out loud, trying to, basically try to tie in all the loose pieces together. And then new listing tool, the easy part, the first promotion selected for migration is our test case. It was volume pricing, the easiest part of the, so again, you could, this almost like reciting of what you actually did or what your consideration was, but you could make it more pointed and more distilled to me. Because the first promotion selected for migrations as our test case was volume pricing. You could literally had that in the intro. You could say that because we had this data which says X, we decided to approach volume pricing, and this is what the project was about. Bam. Like, that case study. Or don't even need to be that specific, really. And then you illustrate, I think, that this is what it is. But you could, visualize it a bit. You could tie in a few different loose ends here, or like that wording as well. And that would be it. And then the hard part, it doesn't scale. In the initial stages, integrating volume pricing into active listings seemed like a straightforward victory. I began preliminary designs. So this is like, this is reminding me, or I guess is similar to how you would write a blog post about your work or a case study. Like a type of a case study could be a blog post where you represent your experience, kind of like, oh, this is my thinking, this is what I did, which is, again, I'm not saying it's not right thing to do, but consider if being that personal or using like straightforward victory seemed like straightforward victory is appropriate, or is it like pointed enough, again, because otherwise you're basically inflating the text even further and making it almost too personal for what the work is, if that makes sense. So I would maybe, clear that up if it would be up to me. I began preliminary designs, extended yada yada yada. However, on the enthusiasm was met with questions from the team responsible. Yeah, it's very wordy. Immediately, I think the work is, it's obviously for eBay. It obviously there is some substance to that, but you could clear this up. You could make it more pointed, and maybe even, again, this is my perspective, right? Like just a stranger on the internet reviewing your case study. But if I would review your portfolio, I wouldn't invite you for the interview because of what you listed in the content. I would invite you for the interview because you have 4 case studies. One is a big name, and I would see that, okay, maybe this type of work with the enterprise tools for customer experience aligns with what my company does as a hiring manager. That's why. But you would certainly lose me, and I don't want to kind of demean or roast your portfolio. That's not about that. It just pointed feedback that it's very wordy. There is a lot of text, and I think you could get to the structure, which is it's, again, you have a setup, the background, you have a problem, you have your approach, and you have your outcomes. But that approach here is peppered throughout, and it's very lengthy. So you could literally, cram it down. And the best way to do that is you have bullet points for each of the key milestones, and then basically expand as needed be, but not more, if that makes sense. And use your images to illustrate the key points, but don't anchor the actual flow with the images on themselves. I know it's like this, for example, image, and again, this is nitpicky. It almost drops in within the case study, and I don't know if this is meant to show what was or what your actual use case is, or if this is something you're addressing in this specific flow. So that's something I also would want to know. Because you could start a bit broader, you could show some journeys maybe, you could show maybe a flow of or steps. You could literally draw it out and conceptualizing that story visually, and then say, this is what I'm literally looking at, this specific sliver in the bigger customer journey, and this is what it looks like now. This is what it looks like after I did my awesome job with my team, if that makes sense. But again, it's it's just leveling it up, improving it, so it's more clear to people. Similar to what I guess you did here, but even more, try to zoom out before you zoom in specifically, so I'm guided with what you want me to see or what value you want me to perceive. Again, I haven't looked into this deeply. I was just scrolling through and making quick few notes. So you are showing some of the key elements. Let me just click out. Promotion as the container, listing as the container. Yeah, that's where you could also add a bit more clarity to this. Again, you don't need to overload it with messaging, but you could literally state what I'm looking at. For example, in my portfolio, and again, my portfolio is management, but it has have a few case studies for IC work. I literally add a note, just like you did in here, I guess, a caption. But I state that this is an example of one of the components which needed to be improved. And this is before and this is after. But basically prefacing it, so I don't need to kind of go through a big story to understand what's going on. To further complicate matters, we had incorporated editing feature. However, this editing feature turned out to be illusory. Then a user chose edit volume pricing behind. Yeah, it's a lot of information. Consider how could you, again, clean it up, or not to say clean it up as in like, but you could wordsmith it to be more pointed, or make sure to hide it so people can look into it if you really want to understand the why, or what, you know, what you're thinking. And also, to further complicate matters, this is very verbose. I was looking for a right word to illustrate that. But you writing this is how I would write a blog post. But your case study, where actual people would review your work, make sure it's more pointed, more closely aligned. And I don't know if it makes sense for the people watching it. I don't know if Daniel is himself on the actual live stream. Do share a note with me as well. I can see some things going on in the chat. I think people are talking between themselves. That's fair. But make sure to add also what you think about case study, because it might help Daniel as well to reflect. Some process things, again, add a caption. So I see you kind of added it to illustrate that this is what we did as a team, but you could literally add a small caption saying an example of in-person workshops we did with a team to ideate or to prioritize or something, to explore options maybe. Just to kind of like add context to that. Again, we're not trying to add more words, because that's already, you know, something you could improve on. You could distill it, but it's kind of just adding a few other bits. So I know, is it before, is it after? I can't really tell without spending a lot of time if this is a solution or if this is a before, if that makes sense. And then after long learning sessions meeting, I suggested we copy the same mental model used in the marketing section instead of adding volume pricing as a feature. Let user manage sales from active listening. I know exactly what Daniel is trying to do here. So, and I'm trying as well to be as precise, I guess, with my feedback too, because Daniel, again, don't take this as a like, oh, this is not good. No, you have a project which you did, and you obviously succeeded, right? So now you just need to present it right, so it makes sense for some stranger, me or someone else, ideally someone else who wouldn't spend as much time. This type of answer, I would expect you to talk about it in the interview itself. So you and me are on a call and I'm saying, show me a case study or talk to me about what you did there, and you go through this thing. And I say, well, what sort of like working arrangements did you have with your team, or what sort of workshops did you do? You could tell me exactly, oh, we did these long learning sessions and meetings. In one of them, I suggested we comply with the same mental model used as marketing section, yada, yada. You then go into these type of story bits. But for the case study itself, you don't have to go that deeply, or you need to consider how can you abstract it so it doesn't become, again, as verbose. That's key feedback bit. And then managing campaigns in active listening was too complex. We tried many different ways to edit, add, and remove promotional campaigns. Sprawling at a nightmare. Here, besides the actual copy, I would just ask you, do you have a data? If we are interviewing again, and I invited you to the interview, I would ask you, how did you know that this is a convoluted, did you say, sprawling nightmare and convoluted mess? Very dramatic, but like how? Like where did you, like why is that the case? Did you user test it? Did you do something else? Like all of these problems you're listing out, you know, and you're listing it out quite like abstracted from a point that, okay, this is a problem scope, and this is all the things we try to explore and do and things of that nature. But try to put it a bit more linearly, where you say, all the problems, their origin, this is what we did about it, right? And this is, you're putting like almost chapters of snapshots of problems here, and I think you can be much more clear of that. So, you know, a challenge for you, and I don't know, okay, we're almost there, but the challenge for you, consider carving out some time and creating a shadow case study, again, and A/B testing it with someone. You could ping me again on Design Squad community and say, hey, V, I did this version 2. What do you think about it? But make sure to just go completely off-piste from what you have. Make sure to challenge yourself, and maybe even take a simple template, which you would never hear me from me, like, you know, me trying to tell someone or recommend someone to just use a template. But try to kind of make it like, you know, again, Background, problem, process, solution, outcomes. Just list it out that way and try to kind of like rearrange your mind in a way which would make it easier for someone to go through that story, if that makes sense. And then see exactly what works. Perhaps you're going to come up with a third option which is overlaid between the two, and that's where the goal is going to be for you, which is going to be most successful, if that makes sense. You have a lot of questions for each of these things, but then again, I would ask you, how do you know that? Where is the signal coming from? Do you have any research from before? Maybe it's a background research, maybe it's the team had hypotheses which you user tested later on, things of that nature. It was like we learned the hard way why the campaign manager was on a completely different section of Seller Hub. Yeah. And then I think this, I presume, is the new flow, which you should state that this is the new flow, this is the improvement, this is the, you know, the after what you did ultimately. Let me see if I can quickly run through it, because from UI perspective, I'm not even questioning it. I know what eBay looks like. I know their design system, and it's clear you use design system. If you deviated from their design system, you could call out, especially in product design. You could say, hey, because of our research or something we did, we discovered that this just simply doesn't work off the patterns we have in a design system, therefore we did something else. But other than that, I think it's quite standard design system, which is fair. You know, it's nothing bad about it. So, and then you conclude, although we brainstormed numerous potential solutions, we couldn't reach a consensus on the best course of action at the moment. Bringing the other sales into was temporarily halted pending further research. Nevertheless, we unanimously agreed that retained listing represented a valuable test case. Going forward, it was evident that volume pricing and its own shouldn't pose significant issues. This approach proved successful, resulting in increase in gross volume, yada, 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 leading to improvement and triggered. Overall, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, marking a significant achievement for the entire team. If you would be able to add some anecdotal statements too, maybe it's users or customers or maybe the team itself, that would illustrate that further. If you have any, if you don't, you could maybe ask someone, or maybe you could paraphrase and say, this is what the team mate said about the work. But some of these things, like the results and things of that nature, as a senior, you could preface in the beginning as well as one of the outcomes. Again, we're waiting to call out of what's to come, like in the end as an outcome, but you can literally repeat it, because your overview should summarize what the whole case study is about. From, again, the background, the problem, roughly speaking, the process, and then the solution, and then the outcome. It could be that you cover it all in overview without ballooning it or being too verbose, and then you go into detail further on. You can even repeat those metrics again down below, but then maybe you can visualize it somewhat. And what you learn, this project was my first project at eBay, and I was still getting my bearings. Don't need that. It's fine. The learnings and what you learned is quite obvious as well, because you stated the challenges and things of that nature. But what I learned is something people are taught in boot camps, to add that to a case studies, which is fair for like juniors or someone who's trying to break in, because they're still saying, hey, I'm still developing my skills, so it's fair enough to add it. But as a senior or midway to senior, I mean, you could just say learnings, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. And that learning could be that, hey, we should have done more research. And I would have, if it would be up to me, I would have done more research in these specific capacities. Like being very concise, basically. You don't have to, again, make it, you know, this personal story, because it's not about you. And I know people say, hey, you have to tell me what you did on a project. This is not the same thing. You need to tell what you did on that project, but you can dissociate yourself from the results and the project itself, because project is not you, map is not a territory. So the project, in the project, you are going to be limited with constraints, which you could also highlight in a case study, and you work with those constraints. However, in a different company, those constraints wouldn't exist or be different. Therefore, your approach would be different That's a learning. So you dissociate yourself. You don't have to just say, hey, I would have done this. Like, you literally can say these are the methods which you could do as well to do something else or to improve the things. And also, you don't need to say this was my first project at eBay. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's a good project. You did some work. Be proud of it. Don't don't say it was my first or things of that nature. It doesn't matter. Now, the challenge to that bit, and I know some people are going to join late, but I think you can visualize it a bit more. Besides, thinking of a structure of a case study and how you can present it in words and how can you showcase the bits and bobs. Also, like, maybe consider how you can lead with some of these flows or some of these elements, because US market is even more so, I guess, hard on hiring visually first or visually biased designers right now. At some point, we're again going to even out the playing field where you're going to have UX researchers and designers and generalists across the board. But right now, a lot of the companies are hiring that the prerequisite is someone who can also prototype in visual means, even if they might be focusing on UX purely. So I would consider, how can I jazz this up with the assets you have, with the artifacts you have? How could you jazz it up so the picture tells like 1,000 words worth of story instead of you going into detail and writing so much about it? And then consider how you can show the before and afters. How can you show what the problems are? And maybe you can visualize the problems and say, these are the problem buckets. These are 5 buckets of problem. The bigger problem is this, but we kind of drill down into these 5 buckets. And for each, you had a hypothesis of what to improve. And this is what's your approach. And bam, this is the result, if that makes sense. Because I feel you already have a lot of weight with eBay. You can double down with that so that you can pave your way for recruiters and hiring managers to be like immediately, oh, okay, we work for this quite highly mature design company, which has that org and quite mature. Everybody knows it, everybody's using it, maybe happy or not happy, it doesn't matter. They can give you a call and get you in. But yeah, I haven't looked at other case studies. Maybe they're better, maybe they're different, but I think you can, again, visualize it. Like here. So this is probably the latest one, right? What is the problem? What are affiliation models? So here you kind of split it down into headlines. You visualize some bits here. You showcase who the users are. So I imagine that you did eBay before that. I would go back to eBay and try to meditate of what your approach was, how much data. You probably don't have artifacts anymore, maybe. So what? Still, think of how to adopt an approach which would guide the actual user more clearly through that thinking, working. Again, it could be systems thinking, maybe visual design, things of that nature, but you cover those means ultimately. And again, I don't want to go into this now. Maybe in the next live stream, Daniel, let me know if you want to talk through it. But I think most of the people who kind of like are there seeking an senior UX designer or lead or staff designer, they would go there. To abstract further or zoom out, since you mentioned, or since Daniel mentioned that we want to get into staff or principal level, that's going to take, I don't want to say it's going to take you ages, but that's naturally going to take years of development. So I wouldn't even think about like, oh, I want to get to principal right now. Like, everything at its own time as it comes. And ideally, you would want to be promoted in those kind of roles anyways. And that's where you would get that mentorship you seek, that seniority you seek, or that player coaching from other designers who are more keen. Because you mentioned yourself, you have some gaps which you recognize and you want to get eventually to that staff or principal. I wouldn't kind of like jump ahead, because that would be the worst you can do for your career, because eventually you're going to realize, shit, I don't have enough of knowledge or methods or experience to actually do that work, and you're not going to get like offers ultimately. So find the senior position or maybe early staff, but try to learn within those positions and try to find a position which has some of that mentorship, which is so rare right now. But if you join a company which has a bigger design capability, it's much easier for you to pick up the speed and learn from it. And the rest is just gonna follow. So don't force that progression. Make sure you force the, I guess, projects and how you approach your things so that we're good enough that you kind of feel confident enough to do that. And I'm talking beyond the, Dunning-Kruger, where you feel like, oh, I can do everything. I think at this, like, since Daniel has 6 years of experience already, I bet they went through Dunning-Kruger already and forgot about it, and they're actually way ahead than anyone else. Like like right now is that time where you're like evaluating, what do I know, how much do I know, am I actually right in these things? And I think what I read from the actual notes is exactly that. And I think you only gonna know if you're right enough the more repetitions you do. So if you have another row, you can basically see what works, what doesn't, ideally with other more experienced people. But yeah, I hope that helps. I think without looking for that LPL financial case study, I think you could apply that to your eBay case study, because I think that came first. And that was kind of like, you described exactly what you did end to end. But I think now you need to create a version which is going to make sense for a stranger. Cool. Let me take a sip. Let's see what the chat is up. And chat, make sure to write your notes. What do you think? With case studies, I think it is vital to have different processes as a minimum of 3 or 4, e.g. research, user flows, wireframes, UI, etc. Well, if I understand that correctly, you're saying that I guess you need to cover the bases just to be safe, so that maybe a recruiter or hiring manager sees, and this is how I'm reading it, by the way, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it is true in a way, but also, again, some markets are going to be specialized in different things. And if you do a project which is super UI biased, especially in the junior years, that's how it comes usually. It's either super research biased or super UI biased. You shouldn't kind of cover it, like you shouldn't basically spend a virtual page for research, virtual page for IA or information architecture, virtual page for UI, because then you're going to inflate things which are not as deep in that project. And you're kind of going to then deflate the things which were deeper. So you shouldn't also fake it or try to cover it all, I think. You should, you should show it as it is, the project. You shouldn't make it the thing it wasn't, because it's going to come out in the interviews. Or the hiring manager is going to tell exactly what it was. For example, with eBay, I called out to Daniel, users, who are they? Like, do you have any data for that? Like that to me, I immediately would be quizzing in the interview, like, or maybe even considering like, hey, should I even talk to Daniel? Because I don't see that they have, that definition of like that systemic thinking of end-to-end, the holistic approach, thinking about the customers, who are they, what do they need, all that jazz. That's one of the considerations. Thinking of important spatial design too, for example, Vision Pro UX, so like how should be the variation of a projects for a fresher, for a junior designer. Also like AI pins, design minimal apps. That is, I mean, you should always strive for emerging tech, but it's not, let's say if Daniel, again, I don't want to use Daniel as an example, but if Daniel would have another case study with Vision Pro conceptual work or even the real one, I wouldn't care. Because if I work in the enterprise tools and this eBay case studies similar work or exactly the same work in this bigger enterprise company, that's all it matters. When the rest is like just polish ultimately. So it gives you a few points if you have nothing else in your portfolio. But what's gonna give you the most points is the alike projects in its maturity, in its challenges, in its problem, in its type. Right now, if you look at the openings, all the openings are going to be very specific, and hiring managers no longer look at people who do it all basically in a way that they did some of this, some of that, some of that. They want specialists in a sense of like someone who did SaaS experience for B2B, or someone who did exclusively B2C experience, or someone who did those emerging technologies like AI tech. They're going to be specific on that, and because there's hundreds of people applying, they can be selective. Before, like couple of years ago or so, that was completely the opposite way, where people who had it all, who had a lot of different cases, still were given a chance because they could learn on the job and things of that nature. Right now, thousands of applicants, hiring managers are sitting back and basically saying, well, we don't really have a B2B SaaS experience they seek, but we do have some SaaS experience for B2C. Not good enough, even if they could be a star and they could do a job perfectly. So that's one of the things. And I think it's going to take a bit until it levels out and until reality kicks in again, until jobs pick up. So refer to my other live streams or videos where I cover that strategic outlook of, you know, what the market is like and where it's going for, or where it's going to. Cool. Right. Let me take a sip and then let's jump to a next case study. I see a lot of notes. I'm gonna get back to that because it's, you know, it's gonna take me on a journey somewhere else, and then we're gonna discuss it. All right. Let's see what Christopher did. So Daniel is fine. I mean, I think the feedback should be pointed. And again, Daniel, make sure to add me if you have any other versions of that. But I think your eBay case study has to be reworked because it's powerful. You just need to market it better in a way. Right. Echoes. Christopher, I'd like to be considered. I recently have found my niche in designing B2B software the past couple of years. I'm interested in full-time position as a UX designer, working on design systems, or a product manager with the right industry product. I feel that recruiters and employers mostly brush me off due to the previous experience only being freelancing. So this is one of the key challenges between freelancing and planning the launch of my first software for UX researchers. I haven't updated my portfolio within the last 12 months. I do have one case study for a contract I did with the US Department of Defense. Yep. And I have another case study I would like to add to my portfolio in the near future. Open to feedback and suggestion on how where I'm missing the mark and what I can do better at. Thank you. So again, the problems here are likely less about the case studies or portfolios. Like I think I have another case study immediately points that Christopher doesn't have enough case studies. So it's not about number again or quant of case studies, it's about the qual. So if Christopher would apply, which I'm gonna give you a bit of a foreshadowing here, to similar company, similar industry, similar needs, similar project as this, we likely would get a call back, even if it's one case study. But again, the match has to be there. And it's almost like if you don't have enough case studies of quality, then you funnel all those potential employers and all those potential interviews out. You know, if you say, this is what I can do, B2B enterprise tool for, you know, defense management, for some sort of, with a 3D, some big data handling platform, I presume, things of that nature, without looking deeply into this, then you're going to match the companies who need exactly that. The companies who work for, make apps, B2C software, or some SaaS for B2C or something along those lines, they're going to go for candidates who have that. Because again, so many candidates are out there who all have that. So for you to stand out, you want to cover as much ground or as much naturally fitting ground as possible. But if you want to specialize so neatly, so laser focused, then, you know, it's your approach, it's your decision ultimately. But I hope that makes sense because it has to match. Again, we're no longer in those pastures where employers, because they're spoiled, their employers basically are, you know, they're looking for these candidates because there's no one who could do the work, or they have to compromise. They can go for this Bob who has case studies which are adjacent field or adjacent industry, or, you know, maybe they're doing B2B work when the hiring manager needs B2C. They're no longer compromising because we have so many people out there after all those layoffs, market corrections, things of that nature. So they can be more picky. That's why, that's why it's hard to get hired right now, exactly for that case, because someone could be like looking, yeah, maybe 5 years ago would be a perfect match, or I would compromise. Right now I don't have to, because I have more candidates on a pipeline. I can review those and maybe pick one which is closer matching the actual role. So that's the thing. Anyhow, so I would advise Christopher to, as soon as possible, add that case study. I presume this is your self-directed work, so you should consider how you can add that as soon as possible, just so to enrich that portfolio and maybe increase your chances. Because if you apply for something which is not government oriented or enterprise oriented, but something like some company who does basically web design or some sort of e-commerce, then you would want to have case study in e-commerce or web design or something like that, if that makes sense. Without obviously watering it down, it has to be quality first. One big challenge here, I think, for Christopher is that they've been freelancing, which is a big, big, big issue. A lot of the people start their careers freelancing, or they go freelancing, and then they cannot get a permanent job because of reasons. And those reasons obviously are, people are very skeptical that you can work basically daily and grind with different teammates, so through all those different challenges you're never detached, and almost like working as a satellite, doing your tasks somewhere else, or just performing tasks which are isolated from the actual organization. So that's going to be key, and key reason why you might not get your foot in the door. People just see you as someone who's a mercenary, who does the work, but not necessarily are going to do the work day to day, or not necessarily knows how to do the work. You might know all the stuff, you might know all the ways of working, but people are going to be skeptical. And I'm not trying to demean you. I'm just, telling you of how the people view these things as, as a form, as a basically someone who could hire, but also someone who would maybe their product manager who's seeking UX designer for their team or something along those lines. And they have no idea what UX is about. They're going to be like, oh, should I go for a person who had agile experience and worked with product manager before in a trio and closely did so for 5 months or 5 years as a permanent employee, or should they go for a freelancer? Naturally, they're going to go for someone who had that permanent experience, and that's what's shooting you in the foot. So you need to reflect and meditate and think it back. Do you want to be a UX designer who's permanent? Do you want to be a design systems oriented person? Do you want to be a product manager? That's a first. That's a big challenge. You need to take it away, and it has less to do with your portfolio, but more to do with your career. Decide what's your goal, what you want to be in 5 years, and say, I want to be a UX designer for a big tech company, and I want to be a permanent employee. That's a goal. And then your portfolio is going to look differently. Your resume is going to look differently. Your approach to learn and market yourself is going to look differently. However, if you're not sure and you could do it all, that's what shoots you in the foot. Because you're so open, you're like, oh, I could do UX job, maybe product management job, maybe do some design systems, maybe still freelance. Maybe I'm gonna do entrepreneurship and building that first software of UX researcher. It's spreading you so thin that that's why people can't position you as a candidate for that employment. And again, it's not to demean or critique harshly or roast. It's not that at all. It's just feedback from what's happening here, because you need to be deciding of like, what do you want your future life to be like. If you're gonna freelance, it's gonna be really hard to get back into, or get into, if you haven't been there, into those permanent positions. I'm gonna be upfront with you. Same applies for seniors who, let's say, we might be employees as juniors, maybe as seniors, and then we go contracting because the money is lucrative. They go off, they do those projects, and they work for different companies where their portfolios mature. But because people view them as contractors, as freelancers, as consultants, they almost like, they can't position them as permanent employees. And those people who do freelancing, they almost have to restart their career or restart the cycle, that last cycle, from where they were, like a solid employee, I guess, as in permanent employee. if that makes sense. We almost have to go back a bit, and that's where they start again. And it's because the employers are spoiled, they have too many candidates, but also because people just might not position you as someone who is going to be there for the next 3 years, hammering day in, day out, eating crap, ultimately, of corporate BS or politics or stuff like that. The things which make UX work hard, because it's not freelancing. You know, as a freelancer, you do client management, stakeholder management, but when you're part of an organization, you have to eat different type of crap. And I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. But this is the reflections which you need to do first before going into case study. I know it was a lengthy intro, so I'm keen to see what everyone else thinking about it. I see that someone liked Daniel's portfolio. That's great. One thing I've learned, if a portfolio text looks like too much on mobile, it's too much on desktop. That could be a good heuristic. I think it's, the best way to find out is user test, and it's just give to someone to read. If they lose the attention or they have a lot of questions, basic questions, it kind of like immediately can tell, okay, it didn't resonate. But also the 5-second or 3-second test where you take a look at the body of the text. If you understand what's going on, is good. If not, then, it's ought to be improved, and you don't want it to be too lengthy. Okay. Now, Christopher's portfolio, sorry. So their home lands on this. Christopher Nye is a designer who makes software easier to use and increases work productivity for B2B SaaS companies. So this is what could shoot you in the foot, Christopher. As I said, you might be disqualifying yourself, because if you state specifically that this is what you do, people who are going to be into B2C, they're not going to look deeper, or they might not look deeper, because you immediately say that this is your specialty. So I would think if I want to do this, or maybe if you do, that's fair. But imagine if a recruiter, and if you apply for e-commerce business, let's say, and it could be enterprise tools for e-commerce, or, the backend tools, the back office tools, or it could be customer experience facing tools. If a recruiter sees this and they're all about B2C, or specifically enterprise tools, and they want that keyword, they're just going to overlook. So that's one piece of advice for you. So maybe thinking of how you can introduce yourself. You add this project, which I think takes me to that project view case study. That's fine. I have small nitpicky piece of feedback. When first I viewed this portfolio, I viewed it on a bigger screen, and I don't know if I can expand it. Maybe like this, that could do it justice. Don't want to break it. But then I viewed it on a big screen. This UI blended in so much of your portfolio that I wasn't sure if I'm looking at a case study yet, or if I'm at a presentation step or a homepage or something along those lines. So consider it visually presenting, or maybe isolating this as a case study. I don't know if you want to put it in a card. It's going to break your design of a portfolio. I know that visually. But how to make it maybe, smaller, or just reduce it, or embed it in an iPad or a laptop mock-up or something like that. So I can see that this is a featured work. You could literally add a headline as well above saying featured case study or something along those lines. So I know that this is a case study, because it's, it's easy to just kind of lose track of it. And I see you have more, actually. I didn't see that before, but you have more case studies here, right? That's cool. But still, you could kind of isolate it better. So, it doesn't blend in as much, because your product here, this platform, is very similar visual look and feel. I would even say maybe you use Inter for your portfolio, but also your case study project, that Create Sortie, this UI is probably used the same materials, things of that nature. It looks almost like it's part of it. That's the only thing which kind of threw me off before. Okay, so you have 3 case studies. Again, I'm gonna pick one, but it's good that you have this too, bridging the talent gap for youth sports with skill masters. is this really B2B? Is it B2B SaaS? Or is it a B2C experience for someone? Like this is the type of stuff where like I'm thinking if this does justice for you as a title ultimately. It's a nitpicky thing, maybe I'm not getting it right. I like the look and feel of these, but they're different as well, so it shows a bit of a visual flair and I guess differences in your approach, so that you picked very different projects or very different case studies. I like that it has some of that gamification here as well, to put it like simply. So it shows a bit of, I guess, breadth of the visual flair or how you approach things. But I would also expect that from a freelancer, so that's good. That's pretty damn good. It's good that you have variety or diversity of different ways to solve problems. And then future vision, shaping the future of how businesses happens today for B2B SaaS companies who want to gain competitive advantage by elevating their organizations. UX maturity, a mouthful. I would simplify that, but also consider if that's not if that's boxing you in, because you could be just future-minded designer who does that for any business whatsoever. It doesn't have to be B2B SaaS companies unless you really, really want to specialize in that. I see that someone else was confused as well about that, and some other people dropping in, hey, so from Kevin, I've been a consultant for some time before being in-house. I can't agree more with you via experience. Yeah. And to be honest, Kevin, I was consultant. I was an employee, sub-consulting. Like I was part of a consulting house doing digital consulting, and I made the best portfolio ever. But even if I was an employee and I did design work for the employer plus their clients as a consultant, like did that dual work, I would be interviewing and people would be like, oh, so you were consulting, you weren't like doing much, like you didn't manage any people, you didn't like, you know, you didn't have that in-house experience. And I was like, no, I had, but I always had to almost prove. Whereas my resume right now for the consulting experience, which I did like a couple of years, literally states, I managed this team, I did this work for my employer, plus I consulted these clients and I list the clients out. So basically kind of covering all bases. Because again, if you just state freelancing and I did 3 months here, 6 months there, 12 months there, it's just gonna look like, you know, you weren't embedded and augmenting that UX within a company. So I'm glad it resonates. Now I was working for clients for very long contracts, 3 to 4 years, and was totally embedded in the product teams. You can totally make this pass for identical experience being in-house. Yeah, but then you actually need to make an effort. That's kind of my point. And I think, Kevin, you know it, like you have a skin in the game in it, but you almost have to make a point to preempt and cover those bases, because you know, it might not resonate with some recruiters or some hiring managers. They're going to see, oh, freelancer, and they're just going to be like, okay, we need someone who has that in-house experience. I think the pure black in the portfolio is a bit too harsh. I don't know. I kind of like it. I like that there is, you know, like visual stuff. It's clean enough. I think the only thing that threw me off again is how the one case study blended in with the rest of the portfolio. You know, it's just that. But subjectivity, right? Like, I don't think recruiters or hiring managers would necessarily disqualify them. Let's be honest. It would be still about case studies, resume, all that experience jazz. Let me just quickly go. So, okay, Christopher, a lot of word, photo, cool. Wordy. As I said with Daniel's portfolio, make sure to bold in some things. So like keywords or something like that, so I can quickly scan through it. I see that Christopher has experience with healthcare, government, fintech, web, free, and AI. And then clients as well. That's cool. You could bold in that. But this healthcare, government, fintech, web, free, and AI. Again, it's me, Christopher, but I would maybe even replace that with the type of work or the channels, the solution types. You know, you're a passionate designer, but do you really want to do just B2B SaaS companies? You could literally say B2B, B2C SaaS, and everything else. You know, don't limit yourself, because I'm sure you would be able to design it for anything like anyone else, but some dummy like a recruiter who's just gonna like, you know, some of them obviously, I'm not gonna demean them, but some recruiters might see a keyword and they're gonna be like, not for us, let's not proceed with it, right? So feel free to kind of extract that, like that experience. Clients, so you list some of the things. I think you could list that up as well in your home as well at the home page. You could list maybe logos if you have an agreement, if you can use them. You have social proofing as well. I would just take that page out. I know it's a small thing, it's not about your case study, but I would list it on the page itself, because that adds, that positions you as a better person. And also look for quotes or ask for people to, because you want to get in-house, or I presume you still want to do that, ask for those people you worked with for social proofing of how you work together. Because here you see we were particularly impressed with both efficiency and thoroughness. Understood the issue and giving him chance to diagnose. So it's all kind of detached. So all of your social proofing reviews of what the people say is basically about like how they gave you a challenge, you take it away, you go back to something you solved, no interaction in between. Or this commitment to Figma design, I lost that last one. What was it? Figma design deliverables, project timeline. So still freelancing. If you don't want to freelance anymore, skip that. Or try to ask for some other reviews from people or some other quotes from people, again, which would illustrate that exchange and working together instead of being a mercenary. Because back in the day on LinkedIn, I think I received this quote from one of my managers. We worked in the house, but they were saying something like, "V is very good taking like back of the envelope challenge and then coming back with a solution." That's exactly what freelancer quote is like. So, you know, it didn't position me well for the in-house opportunities where I would go through the politics, corporate crap and in-house variables and, you know, all the different challenges. Okay, Daniel is back, or Daniel is in. Hi, this is Daniel. Thank you so much for reviewing my portfolio, but since I'm California, I slept through it. LOL. I'm looking forward to watching the review when the live stream is posted. Awesome. Do so. It's in the first half, by the way. And there is good stuff in your portfolio. Not to repeat myself for everyone else, but there's also stuff which you could improve. We specifically looked at your eBay case study, which I think is a bit older than your recent case study. And I think there is a lot of learnings you could take from one to the other in terms of what you present. Because eBay alone is a big magnet for recruiters and hiring managers across the board. It's a no name. I think you should double down in clarifying things and marketing it a little bit better. And I'm telling exactly in that first half of what. So do take a look. I think it's going to help you out quite a bit. And let's see if Christopher has a contact page. That's fair. Let's dive into their case study. You know, long overdue because we kept on going on tangents here and there. I hope nobody minds. All right. So this is a case study. Now, first and foremost, again, just like with Daniel, I said why the case study was powerful. In Daniel's case, it was enterprise tool. It was eBay, big name. It works. I mean, that's what recruiters, especially those who might be like detached from UX and they don't understand that, you know, UX is UX, doesn't matter where you solve it. It's always messy. It's always challenging. It's always maturity is challenged. Doesn't matter how apparent or not apparent the company is. So that's one. For Christopher, I think really good thing, and what kind of impressed me before I even went into the detail and, you know, organized this live stream was that the actual platform is what I guess would resonate with people who are, companies or clients who, or businesses who have some sort of platforms for data visualization. Again, they would be a B2B business, a SaaS business. They are solving the complexity of big data and making it easy to use for humans. They are using advanced charts, again, data visualization, not to repeat myself, a lot of enterprise data, as evident from this preview and this flow. So this would resonate with a lot of companies. A lot of companies I worked in the past, in transport, in energy sector, in governmental sectors, all those different things. That's what would resonate. And if Christopher would apply for them, I would want to have a chat, given that everything else in this case study is, spot on with what the actual person would need to do in their job, if that makes sense. But I like that Christopher does a preview and animates it too. So something maybe a lot of people could learn. They could do a lot of the things here. I like that they go for it. But this thing, as I said before, blends in with the rest of the portfolio. So kind of like framing it, maybe adding a mock-up, making it, like look good enough, not going overboard, but kind of just extracting from the rest of a portfolio. That styling itself would help, because it could kind of blend in too much. But let's take a look at what the role was. UI design, UX research. Just say UX design or product design, combine the two. You could even say role, responsibilities, bam, bam, bam. So, you could say product designer, I did user research, I did user testing, I did prototyping, interaction design, like however you want to skin it, as long as it's appropriately sliced, just bam, bam, bam. Because otherwise, it's just one role really. The company itself, the website, the year. So for the year, I would want to know how big is the project. For example, in Daniel's case, I think it was May to March, if I'm correct, kind of getting it correctly. So it's more than half a year, right? Just tell me that the project is kind of like that. Like, is it half a year? Is it 3 months? Is it 2 weeks? That matters. And you should be honest too, because you cannot BS for it. Like, people are going to tell, especially if they're going to think, oh, it was maybe 6 months. We get on a call and it's clear that it was a few iterations and it took you like 4 weeks. Just don't lie. Just say it's 4 weeks, and then double down on other case studies, which would be longer, or try to create a project which would be long enough. The U.S. Department of Defense, America's largest agency, which provides military forces needed to deter war, yada, yada, yada. Challenge for department, artificial intelligence accelerator. So I'm just running it through. The problem: Air Force pilots conduct post-flight debriefing sessions to assess their performance and mistakes, but analog tools such as whiteboards and writing notes hinders their ability to effectively learn from missions by relying on memory. Business goals: utilize avionics, I hope I pronounced it right, data collected on military aircraft, leverage AI, identify grading of aerial maneuvers, plan for mission based on squadron or pilot proficiency. So a lot of it is jargon which I'm not familiar with, but it's fine, I think, as long as you maybe can like ease some dummies like myself, or someone who would review a portfolio outright, who is maybe a stranger who doesn't know anything about this. But the problem itself seems like, yeah, this is people's problem, right? Like, pilots conduct their post-flight debriefing sessions and we have to assess. But maybe you could give a bit more of why, how, to what extent, what's the delta, like what's the start of a problem, what do you want to improve on? So maybe they spend too much time. Maybe it takes them, I don't know, to illustrate, like what I would do. Let's say if I have the data. Perhaps it takes the pilots up to 2 hours each per each flight or each operation to do debriefing. And it's way too much to ask of a pilot. Bam. A problem for both pilot and business. And that's why business would want to utilize or use those goals, if that makes sense. Because time, it's a big cost for Air Force, because we're wasting time, but also it's painful for the people, and people are involved using all these different tools, and a lot of information maybe is unstructured, and people are not precise with their anecdotes, all that jazz. Problem, right? So just being more specific, like if you can add how big is that effort, how big is the pain for both business and the user, you have a solid problem. Because then you know who you're going to help or to what extent. I hope that makes sense. Hello, how can I build my first case study or portfolio? Can I get step-by-step guide? Help. The best point is for you to take a look at, and I guess this is a quick one to nip in the bud. Just take a look at my channel where I review portfolios. You're gonna have, I don't know, 10, 20 portfolios. You can see exactly what they look like, and you're gonna know roughly of like what it should look like. Obviously, don't copy the structure. Make sure it's your own story. But as long as you cover the key foundational structural elements, you should be fine. And how to make my first project or case study is two different things. So for a project, again, go on my channel. There are challenges, which I've been posting in the last year and year before. There's maybe 10 of them. There are specific problems, real life problems out there. Maybe a problem like similar to what, let's say, Christopher solved here or Daniel solved before. You could address those challenges. You could do your own research. You could prototype, create the project, and then you're going to have enough material to create a case study. So don't go on creating case studies before you do the actual work. Do the actual work first and then do the case study. And there's plenty of material. Just make sure to dig into it. Again, channel. The point of the challenges was that, okay, research. So what Christopher did, user interviews. I conducted interviews with 4 pilots stationed at base to understand their work habits. I don't think you need to be that specific as well. I don't know what's in NDA, what's not, by the way. But you also could overview exactly of what the actual approach was. So maybe you did research, prototyping, like maybe visualizing. You know, a lot of the case studies do that. They kind of introduce the process, or they just say, hey, this was the process end to end, and these were the small bits. If I, as a hiring manager, want to look into it, of what did you do for user interviews. But I can see you kind of like try to talk about war habits, pain points, expectations, digital workspace. The pilots are familiar with the jargon and onboard flight instruments, so they didn't want to relearn how to do simple things. Pilots wanted to know at a glance what maneuvers were flown and how well they performed each one. And you add a quote, which is good. Typically at the end of a debrief, the student keeps some of notes, but we erase our tapes, we erase our shot sheets. I don't know what that is. I guess that's something to do with ammunition or artillery, and all data gets flushed. Okay, so I get where you're going for. The primary user flow, we consider it as uploading the, okay, so this is where you immediately go to user flow. I would be interested to know the pain points, the expectations, things of that nature, so that you have that problem enriched. You kind of frame that problem, now enrich it with your research, and then come up with a hypothesis, which then would tell you like, how might I do something like improve those bits. And that's how you would maybe create a new flow and new feature ideas and things of that nature. So it's jumping way too soon, or maybe you're not telling enough from the actual interviews to the actual ideas of what the improvement is. And I think the problem here is actually very complex. Whereas on systemic thinking, I would even question like, did you really understand it in depth? Did you do any experience mapping or systems mapping of what's involved right now? How do you know what are you gonna make as in terms of change? Is it a tool or a prototype, an MVP you wanted to create to kind of create parity first between what we have so far and what we're going to use? Like those dynamics, I would ask you at least in the interview. I would want to know like how deeply you understood, or was it just a project where you have a problem and you can kind of like, okay, interview some people and then you're going to prototype some ideas and then you don't know what's going to happen to it, which we might get into in the end. But that positioning is why it's what could keep you away from getting an interview, because people might feel like, yeah, it's a very surface level prototyping job or UX job, which doesn't have the deep shadowing, deep understanding of the systems, which would be key here. So like utilizing avionics data from aircraft, like, is that some sort of API or a system which exists already? Is this something that is printed for them, like a report, and they look for it, like that information, of course, maybe it's under NDA, but then just say it. Say that you cannot share the artifacts or examples because it's top secret. As well as leveraging AI for identifying, grading aerial maneuvers, planning of mission-based squadron pilot proficiency, things of that nature. I would just be interested to understand the background more. Or did you, as a designer, understand the background fully before you went into creating a flow where you have start, finish? So user flows, zoom out and make a journey. Because if it's a UX project, and it's not just a UI design project, you would consider how and when the actual people go about their tasks. So for example, I might get it wrong of what happened, but the pilot could go through their simulation, whatever they use, right? They exit it. They maybe have to go immediately to some sort of machine, and then they have to fill in those reports. And then once that's done, they're free to go off. Like that journey is where your flow would slot in. But in which part and what do you consider? That's key. Something at least to think about, because that's something I would ask you in the interview as a senior. You have to know, where does the journey start from the actual user perspective? Because it doesn't start with UI. UI happens at some point, but their journey starts with maybe having a cup of coffee or maybe talking to their leader who tells them what they need to be simulating or testing on or practicing today, and then maybe doing some other touch points, which could be hardware and software and people's interactions. And only then they're going to pick up the tool, whatever they use right now, and only then they're going to go through simulation, or vice versa. So it's much more bigger picture. It's like, how can you zoom out before you zoom in so specifically? That's where the deep research and deep UX thinking would come in, which is essential in these systemic projects. And also separating the as-is journey, like what was before versus what's to be. So you could have, in different portfolios, I've seen people, and again, recommended some people to do, show the as-is with the pain points, show the to be, and match the delta so people can clearly see, what did you change? Where is that product introduced? Because this is not just a product, this is a service. It's much bigger than designing a UI, and you know it yourself. And when you say usability testing releases were pushed at the end of every 2-week sprint, which gave us time to incrementally make changes and gather feedback from pilots, such as renaming labels to be more familiar, organizing large sums of data, inclusive design patterns, things of that nature. Here I would be interested to know what you found out. I mean, this is saying what you did about it. Inclusive design, like I would ask, like, why wasn't it inclusive? Like what is that outcome? Maybe you tested with 6 people and most of them just couldn't read something you designed in, I guess this is maybe final, but maybe the contrast was not right for them or something along those lines, but basing it on some sort of outcomes and data. And also, before you even tested it, before you even designed it, how did you prioritize ideas? How did you ideate with the team? Did you get together and, I don't know, just created a flow? That could be very hasty on UX end. It's very lean, super lean UX. I would then question, did you actually know like enough to do that? Things of that nature. So prioritization, prototyping you also could be covering. So before even usability testing, you could say prototyping, and this is what you started with, this is the iteration next, the last iteration, yada yada. So kind of showing it a bit, because it's very unclear, is this final version? Is it version 20? Is it version 2? Or is it version 1, what you did and you tested it immediately changed? But kind of visualizing that or telling a story around that would help. I think the good thing, by the way, for you being so jumpy or kind of showing it so concisely, is that it's just bullet points. So it's easy for me to, I guess, scan and see, but I think some key elements are missing or something you could enrich it with. And if you cannot do that, think of how you can clearly abstract it throughout so that you can mention some bits but hide the others, and when it's clear that it's because of the NDA. I had a question above. Maybe there's a chance you could take a look at it too, or maybe there's a video on this topic. Thanks. Ignat, sure. Could you post it? I'll make, could you repost it, or could you write it again? It's going to be easier for me to approach it if you leave it again in the chat. Just because, you know, it's hard to jump back and forth and find it. In the usability testing, it allows them to get an objective of a view what is happening and how they flew, and be able to make incremental, sometimes significant changes to how they're flying to be safer, more effective, and or more lethal. Whose quote is that? Could you say the role at least? Maybe you cannot mention names, which is fair enough. I think you cannot mention a lot in this because it's government project. But if you can mention that this is a stakeholder at least, or business stakeholder, or senior business stakeholder, or marshal, or sergeant, or general, or team lead, or project manager, you don't have to say who they are. It would make more sense, because otherwise it looks like you're quoting yourself if you're not listing who is actually behind the quote. Technical limitations. Okay, so this is where we're getting into design. So, okay, that's where I think the flow to me is a bit interesting, to say the least. Because I thought that you skip design entirely, and I can see it's down below. You add technical limitations. I think these type of technical limitations is something you could preface in the very beginning. Just seems like it's out of a place, I guess. Or could you? I wonder what could you do? Maybe someone in the chat could write how could they show the challenges or things of that nature. But I think this type of thing you could maybe even add it at the end or in the beginning, because it's quite general. It's ways of working, like our team used Google Material Design Library to jumpstart implementation of our design system in Figma, and I would be like, yeah, I mean, it's fine. Is it really a challenge? Is it a limitation? I think it's just like a, you know, it's a constraint naturally, but it's not something you couldn't work with as a designer. Some design components, our team, like you could maybe rephrase this as a general project challenges and list out not just the tools or a specific library like Cesium. I don't know what that is, but that's geospatial data visualization, 3D-dimensional space. It is technical limitation, but I'm just thinking if a placement of this in the story is right. So just, you know, something to reflect maybe. What does Ignat say? It's interesting, most portfolios are organized by companies, but what should you do if you've been at the same company for 5+ years, launching many features and projects as solo designer? What if you designed an entire product from scratch that was featured in forums and other publications, performed well in its market, but lacked proper research, relying on benchmark from others? Well, make best you can with that. So you cannot improve the past projects. You can only improve the upcoming projects, because you obviously learn from it. You know, like you're saying yourself, we didn't do enough research. We didn't have an good benchmark or competitive understanding or something along those lines, not enough data. You can do better next time. If you're asking of how to position it in the portfolio and you did a lot of the projects, let's say, you need to almost like make an executive decision which of those projects is worth it to be in your portfolio. It could be that you did 20 projects and they're different parts of a product or different products. You could cover them all, and ideally you should, because then you're going to create your case study bank. And as you're applying for company A or company B or company C, and they need specific skill set, which that project could align on, you could then extract and create new case studies and maybe send a PDF, which has just the relevant information. So that's one way to do that. Another way to do that, again, is to be generally picky. And if it's one product, you could cover the evolution, but I wouldn't cover those 5 years because things changed. You could cover a specific start and end, which is midways or half, like the most exciting or most challenging bits, or most bits which would portray of your goal. So if your goal is to be a staff designer or a leader or a manager, or maybe focus on a specific technology, and in that product you did that on a year 4, you could cover that. So it's almost simply being cognizant of what you did and what's needed for you to get to the goal, if that makes sense. And the next step is obviously tailoring. So if you have too much, that's good problems. Now you can cover it all and then tailor and pick and choose of what's most effective for you to get the next job. If that product is all you did and you feel like it's not enough, though, you could do your own projects. Again, starting your own efforts and things of that nature. That's what juniors do and seniors still do, because they want to show that they can do other work, or they can do some sort of richer things and things of that nature. So there's a lot of ways to do that. That project where you're saying the Forbes and other publications showed it, that's anecdotal bits you could add to the actual portfolio as an outcome. You could say it won some rewards, or it was featured in this, or even quote a specific headline of its success. It obviously would kind of like surface it. But again, I have no idea what it is. Like, only you know how deep is the research. You're saying it's not that deep, but maybe you're not looking deep enough yourself. Maybe you can still look into it, like all those different metrics. Or maybe today, because maybe you're working still on it, you can start measuring something from UX perspective. And that next quarter, that next initiative, the next project is where you're going to be accountable, and you're going to be documenting exactly the research and all the different things. So now maybe it's the time to change. It's a lot of ways to skin it, but I think it's not kind of like you're stuck with something. You're never stuck with something. You might not did UX back in the day or did enough research, but so what? Time to do it now, basically. So I think you can move from it. Just decide what you want to do and to what extent. And also your variables are going to match too in terms of the market. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the stream, needs in Japan or market or roles are going to be very different from in California, let's say, with Daniel's case studies. Like the feedback I tried to tell Daniel in the beginning is very different than I would tell you, let's say, in Japan. But that's also like, I have no idea anything about Japan market, or very little. I know a bit more about the US market, but also the general themes is what I'm kind of trying to give you, like more fundamental principles maybe you could reflect on. Right, let's proceed further. So, design. I already mentioned that it creeps in on you suddenly after usability testing. But I guess that's probably because you merged research and usability testing together. Maybe that's one way to do it, but it's very like a corporate document, like where you would have chapters basically. So maybe it's one way to do it. Other way to do it would be to create it a bit more linearly. So your story starts again with a problem. You have some sort of process end to end with as linear way as possible so people can follow. Obviously you can say that it was iterations and stuff like that. And then you did that design or whatever, that usability testing, then you made changes, further changes, that iterated further, maybe do that cycle, and then the end solution. So it's like a more linear, much more flowing story I can follow, or anyone else would be follow. That's one way to do that. Because this reads like a report right now, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's just saying that, you know, it kind of caught me off guard. So you're splitting it. Detected manures are classified by passing acceptable or failed grading scale that can be identified with certainty or consider possible detections. Selecting jumps to a time step. Okay, so you in the design are breaking down specific feature sets or specific value-based feature sets. That's how I read it, right? You're describing exactly what is what. You're kind of breaking it down, which is fair. I don't really have anything to comment here. Pilot profile, and then conclusion. So the only thing what I maybe would comment, because you added 3 different blocks, is what changed, or what did you learn, or again, what was the outcome from user testing from before and after that iteration would also be really useful, because otherwise you're basically breaking it down and presenting it. Like this type of breakdown you could also include next to this presentation, or maybe make it part of this visual animation where you're basically go through all the flow, and then your video is showing, feature set 1 or value for the user is this, and this is the interaction. Like you're basically zooming in into different bits, or maybe using some visual cues of what is where and why, because it's very representative of what the final thing is, but it's not so much for me to understand what's your thinking behind it to actually go from nothing to this, if that makes sense. And also what I mentioned before you got into user flow, you obviously had some workshops, I hope, or ideation efforts, because naturally in every design project, you're going to have way too much to implement. And that's what every stakeholder is complaining about UXers, like that they have way too many things they want to do. So you have to be selective in each and every project of what you're actually going to deliver. And as such, tell me how you did that. How did you ideate, and how did you arrive at what the product needs to be, and what did you leave out? Because you did have to leave something out, because if you didn't, then this is all conceptual. Because let me tell you, whatever you come up with your ideations and deliver to a client, it might not be out there and live. And I presume this is all Figma for now, right? But I might be totally wrong. So you could correct me on that. Again, I don't want to say definitely this, but I have a feeling that some of it got implemented, some of it didn't, and that's totally fair. You could be very prone to that. And the conclusion is results: expanded software testing with 59 test and evaluation squadron at Air Force Base. Crowdbiotics was the first company to successfully leverage that identification challenge to advance the field of AI. And then you have some press. So similar to what actually, Ignat, you said that there was some press about your project. You see how Christopher is embedding the links? I would go a step forward and I would extract some of the anecdotes or quotes from it too, because they're obviously like pilots avoid costly mistakes. I'm gonna take a look at it actually. Okay, it doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it was scrapped, so you need to fix it. Okay, training and API, yada, yada, yada. Okay, and here is the actual thing. And as you can see, it looks slightly different, at least the color scheme, which could be back before and after. But again, this is something that I would be interested to know exactly to what extent you actually implement it, or your team implemented it. And there is a quote: this technology will broaden our aperture to track performance on all aspects of every flight performed on an Eagle. Boom, you have a quote for an outcome, and it's for Major Mark Poplar, Chief of Innovation. You could quote that. This is your stakeholder saying that this is going to be groundbreaking, revolutionary. I don't see any other metrics or anything else I could extract, but I'm also just surfing through it. Maybe there is some other bits like the user benefits, or like how the actual pilots would benefit from it. Like there has to be some sort of bits you could extract if you didn't have like that type of research which would allow you to market it better. You could literally even embed some of the videos. You could use someone else's content, that too. Like this is a YouTube link, right? You could just do that. And there's another quote: it helps take out some of the human factors of being exhausted or someone being stressed out from life or anything else, explained Nellis flight test engineer. Boom. User quote. Even if it's maybe indirectly captured, you could quote it in your portfolio, because this is your work helping someone else and highlighting some of those pain points being addressed, which hopefully you would reflect and add what those pain points are in the beginning. But there is content you can strategically use. I feel like I need to make another live stream just maybe covering of how, or maybe another video of what could you actually do with the PRs or some sort of press releases or stuff like that, the content which could be part of your portfolio, especially if it's public and you don't infringe on any NDAs, which I don't think you are if it's that public. But yeah, I think the overall case study ends very abruptly. I don't know what most of these mean, so you could expand on it. Again, the iterations would also be a question, things of that nature. You know, all those different bits. Like, I feel like there is a bit more you could add to it too, the actual content, quotes, stuff like that, the actual structure, the length of the, or duration of a project. Who did you work with? I understand if this is a freelance work, but who were the people you interacted? Is it a product manager? Is it engineering team? Is it other stakeholders? That type of stuff. But overall, just to summarize, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I think it's a decent case study. I like the actual platform itself because I can see in my head, because I worked in a lot of these type of projects where I worked with decision support, AI, big data, deep tech, basically complexity which needs to be visualized, a lot of different trading platforms, yada yada. I can see how certain hiring managers within enterprise scenarios would be all over it, as long as you can cover a few different bits here. And if you fear still, this is feedback for Christopher, if you fear that you are going to be disqualified because you're freelancing too much, then you could also pepper in your collaboration with other people. Maybe you could reach out to, I don't know, Bob, who was main stakeholder, who you interacted with, and you could ask them to give you a quote of how your work was like what was the result, but also how did you work and things of that nature, you know, that type of thing. And the team set up something what Daniel did where, you know, he went even overboard listing the names. You don't always have to do that, like you can. But if you list the key stakeholders, the teammates, things of that nature, it can also help position you as someone who can do in-house work, because it tells that you worked with personalities. You didn't just work by yourself. So that's a big key takeaway. What is everyone else thinking? I'm almost wrapping up. I'm going to add a few final words. I know we overrun massively. The time just flew by. It's crazy. It's almost 2 hours of this. I mean, I feel like I could go on for even further because it takes so much time to actually do it justice. But yeah, overall, the case studies are strong. I want to just finish off with this notion. We are, again, on the market is falling. There are more openings. You might have seen my latest video. If you haven't, make sure to watch it. But hiring managers are very conservative with rehiring. They're also very spoiled because we have way too many candidates. So, as I said before, if you have one case study, maybe Christopher is a good example. I don't want to just point him out and make him an example, but his work, his portfolio. He has one, let's say, case study in X or something else. Like he has more now, I've realized. There are other case studies. Maybe he added it later on. But he said he had one case study. And if it's super specific and it doesn't fit what the actual hiring manager needs in terms of industry, the type of project, the type of the solution, SaaS, or maybe enterprise tool, or maybe mobile app, or maybe something from emerging tech, Gen AI, yada, yada, like they might disqualify you. And that's because, again, we have hundreds or thousands of applicants. And if one of them has the case study which resonates and is closely adjacent to what we do, we're going to pick that person as long as other variables align. And those other variables also could be very subjective. For example, I talk to so many seniors right now, and all of them, literally all of them, are saying that product managers are the ones who are hiring managers for the new roles, and they're looking for someone who can do it all, but in terms of research, design, and visual design in particular, interaction design, you name it, but they're looking for the flair, so basically craft.
Like the visual design is king right now, and it's gonna be for a while. So if your case study is super specific, that could disqualify you because someone else could have a better case study which matches the needs of a hiring manager. But also maybe if your case study is not presented enough or visually presented enough, it also could disqualify it. So one of the feedback bits I gave to Daniel, but I would also give it to Christopher, is think of how you can present your work more visually, because some of your work might be super enterprisey and it could be black and white, or it could be very quote unquote non-visual, very minimalistic. Like how can you present the actual case study so that can introduce the people without disqualifying you too early too? Because we might look at something like, oh, I want something which is super, I don't know, skeuomorphic or something like that, and you don't have any of that. Like you obviously don't go overboard creating case studies which are skeuomorphic, but think of like how to make it more more consumable, I guess the right word. Because if a product manager, again, is all about the visual design bias, they're going to see that you can do UX, you can do research, but they might be like, oh, but maybe their style is not something I want on my product, and then they could disqualify. So that's tiny bit, which is a painful point, but we need to consider until, again, specialization is going to kick in and a lot of the different types of designers are going to be considered. Some with visual flair, some with more UX flair, some with more like very strategic skill set. But right now we're in this kind of like a crappy situation where it's way too many people, way too many different skill sets, too many strengths and weaknesses, too many different case studies. And a hiring manager is just the one sitting back, smoking a cigar and basically like making a decision. It's like, maybe 5 years ago I would go for them and hire them, but right now I have this other 50 candidates who are just slightly a bit better, and I'm gonna go for them. So that's the situation. But anyways, I'm gonna leave you with that. I hope this is helping anyone, or maybe helps at least Daniel and Christopher. There's a lot in this. There's a lot of angles we could break it down even further. If you like these videos, make sure to again subscribe, join the community too. As I shown before, you can just Google it on Google Design Squad, Discord community, first result, you can join it immediately, it's free. I see a last question. Is it okay to try applying with only one deep case as a beginner? I covered it in the middle of a stream, but to make it short, maybe rewatch it, Igor. You basically, again, because there are so many candidates and everyone has so many different case studies, you need to think about quality, but also quantify it. Meaning you need to enhance your chances of having more examples than just one, because other examples could be what makes you stand out, or could be what the actual hiring manager needs. Because that one case study could be super specific, either too visual or too researchy, or the style is not good enough, something subjectivity doesn't align well. Like just make another project, or keep on making projects would be my advice, so that you can create new case studies as you go through those projects and you can enrich your portfolio. And also just keep an ear on your market, on your region, wherever you are, and see what works, what doesn't. What do recruiters look for? What don't they look for? You could literally reach out to recruiters and say, this is my portfolio. I know you might not have open roles. What do you think about it? Or can you consider me for any of the roles to come? They can give you honest advice as long as you ask, and then you know exactly what the market needs. Life hack. I know it might be uncomfortable to reach out or to be that candid, but you can do it. Just face that feedback, and then you can do something with that. You're not gonna just guess and apply 1,000 times and get no response. You're gonna know exactly what works, what doesn't. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap here because I'm respectful of your time. I'm really appreciative of everyone tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got value from it. If you want more live streams, leave a comment after it's done. I'm happy to run more, maybe suggest some content or things of that nature. But have an awesome weekend. I appreciate everyone, each of you. Keep on hustling. You're going to get there. If you're struggling, if you're getting a job, apply these tips. Try to learn from everyone else. And until next time, thank you so much.